Second World War, which took place between the years 1939 to 1945. Already the seeds of the Second World War were sown by the Treaty of Versailles. Paris Peace Process Treaty also had displeased many nations, and so the events which happened after this led the world towards the Second World War. Causes of Second World War. There are 7 causes, and they are fierce nationalism, groupism, militarism, failure of the League of Nations, Treaty of Versailles, imperialistic ambitions of Adolf Hitler, and Germans' attack on Poland as the immediate cause. We will try to go through all these 7 causes one by one. First cause, fierce nationalism. After First World War, fierce nationalism developed in Germany. Do or die for the country, that is known as fierce nationalism. Japan and Italy, in all these 3 nations, there was fierce nationalism experienced, because Germans could never forget and overcome the Treaty of Versailles, and so in return, in reverse action, Hitler captured some provinces of Austria and Czechoslovakia, following his Nazi philosophy that Germans must get all those provinces where Germans were staying. Italy also could not forget that it was ignored in the Treaty of Versailles, and so under leadership of fascist party, Mussolini started the fierce nationalism and adopted imperialist policies. So also Japan did not remain behind. It also entered into imperialism activities, and so world peace was in danger. Groupism, as the European nations were fearing each other, and so they started to sign treaties. Since France was always afraid of Germany after the First World War, it entered into a treaty with Belgium, Poland, Romania, and Czechoslovakia. Italy signed treaty with Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, Romania, Hungary, Greece, Turkey, and Austria. Russia also signed treaty with Germany, Turkey, Lithuania, and Iran. Italy formed Rome, Berlin, Tokyo Axis group by the support of Germany and Japan. England and France formed another group with democratic values. Germany signed a non-aggression treaty with Russia. So the entire atmosphere of fear was spread in the whole world, and this factor only gave an impetus or speed to the Second World War. Militarism. On one side, efforts were made to maintain peace after the First World War, whereas on the other side, European nations were competing for ammunition. They were not in a position to rely on any country. There was fear and anxiety, and so they started to increase their army forces and also the ammunition. The production of more and more weapons increased in the entire Europe. War weapons which were better than others were being manufactured. Some nations, especially like Russia and Germany, also started compulsory military training for their youths. All the nations began inducting more men into their navy, air force, and Germany. In the east, Japan increased its military force. Finally, due to all these circumstances, Second World War was declared, when even England and France tried to equip themselves with war-equipped weapons. Failure of the League of Nations. An organization which was specially established to maintain world peace, it failed. League of Nations could not become a supreme organization having sovereignty over other nations of the world. Neither did it have its own army to make the nations follow its principles. Also, the member nations were not obliged to take their problems to the League of Nations or to accept the judgment passed by it. Many nations had moved out of the League of Nations. Initially, Russia and Germany snapped their ties with League of Nations, means stopped their relations or left League of Nations. Later, Italy and Japan also moved out of the League of Nations because Italy had captured Abyssinia, Japan had attacked Manchuria, Germany had snatched away some provinces of Czechoslovakia. Still, the League of Nations could not take any steps on them. And so, the greed for power to expand their territories among the several nations became stronger, and League of Nations could not stop groupism. This was the biggest failure of the League of Nations. Treaty of Versailles. Treaty of Versailles got its form in the Paris peace process at the end of the First World War. Because Germany was found responsible for the First World War, it was given a war penalty of 6.5 billion pounds as a war fine. Its mineral rich area, Ruhr province was taken away. Also, it had to open river Rhine for international sea route. Such type of unfair and humiliating treaty was forcibly imposed, or Germany had to sign this. The German dictator Adolf Hitler called the Treaty of Versailles as a piece of paper and announced to reject it. Imperialistic ambition of Adolf Hitler to make Germany a superpower and have it rule all over the world was the dream of Adolf Hitler. Hitler laid the foundation of the Second World War. He had a fierce nationalist and militarist nature. That's why he always wished the unity, stability, and prosperity of Germany at any cost. And the first victim of his imperialism was Austria. Along with the German army, he entered Austria on 12th March 1938. On the very next day of the Munich Convention, Germany captured Czechoslovakia, that is on 1st October 1938. It also captured after that mammal port of Lithuania in March 1939. So a grand German nation was created by Hitler, and we can clearly say that his imperialist policy only was the main reason for the Second World War. How did the Second World War start? German attack on Poland, which became an immediate cause of the Second World War. The above mentioned causes had made the whole world to sit on the heap of ammunition. A small spark could blow up the whole world, and this spark only was started by Germany. German attack on peaceful Poland, 1st September 1939 early morning. So this event or this incident made the Second World War start. Britain and France warned Germany to stop the war immediately, but Germany ignored this warning. And so even Britain and France had to had to enter into this war, and consequently the war spread in the entire world. Outline of the Second World War. With the commencement of the World War II, the world was again divided into two groups. because the history written by the Britishers. So all those countries which joined Britain or England are known as allies, friends, and the opposite parties were known as Axis. So on one side was the group of allied nations which were led by England and France, and on the other side was the Axis group comprising of Germany, Italy, and Japan. Also, some other factors with war-driven mentality had entered into this. Japan attacked the American Pearl Harbor naval base. As a result, America gave up on its neutral stand and retaliated. It joined allied nations and made it stronger. When the war was going on in full swing, America dropped atom bombs on two cities of Japan, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, in order to stop Japan from moving any further. 1,24,000 Japanese citizens lost their lives, and there was absolute destruction. And so Japan had no other option but to surrender on 11th August 1945, and this only brought an end to the Second World War. We have seen in very short but destruction caused again by the Second World War was dangerous. Let us see the effects of the Second World War. We have economic effect, we have communism in China, and we have the beginning of the Cold War. Economic effects. Second World War had caused a horrendous destruction, terrific destruction in the world. All the involved nations which took part in the Second World War had to incur huge expenses. Only America had spent $350 billion, and other nations had spent more than $1,000 billion. Property worth the same also was destroyed. England lost its property worth 2,000 crore, and about Germany one can't imagine. The nations of the world gave more importance to the production of the arms and ammunition, and so there was scarcity of the things which were needed for the basic needs: food, clothing, and shelter. Production reduced in agricultural fields, and so inflation, price rise increased. People had no job, and so they were struggling for livelihood. There was scarcity of necessary goods in the market. People had no money, they could not buy anything, and so their economic life was shattered. As a result, the nations of the world were pushed into an economic depression. There were major changes in the world politics also and economy also. Communism in China. Many nations of the world were impressed by the way Russia had made a fast progress by its communist measures, especially with the Bolshevik Revolution. China too was impressed by this. Japan had become weak after the Second World War, and so under the circumstances, its control over China started to reduce or receded. Taking advantage of this only, Mao Zedong underlined established communist government in the year 1949 at the end of a revolution in China. Beginning of Cold War and long-term effects. Again, after the Second World War also, the world was caught in the grip of another war. Actual war did not take place, but a war-like situation developed, and that only is known as Cold War. After the Second World War, the world was divided into two superpower groups, that is America and Russia, because both had nuclear weapons. At the time of Second World War, both the nations were friends. But after the Second World War, there were differences of opinion between them which went on increasing. So, the democratic America and the communist Russia, following opposite ideologies, became also mutually opposite groups. Other small nations of the world joined these two groups according to their convenience. The war of words and the war of ideologies that both superpowers initiated in order to support or oppose each other's opinion only created an atmosphere of another war which actually did not take place, and it is known as Cold War. Many a times the situation for the Third World War seemed to be created. And so to overcome this, when already Second World War was going on, again the leaders met together and they came to a conclusion to start an organization which could establish world peace, and so United Nations came into existence. We know that at the end of the First World War, a League of Nations was formed in order to establish world peace. But we know that Second World War occurred and League of Nations became a complete failure. So at the end of Second World War, on 24th October 1945, the United Nations was established and the main purpose was underlined to establish peace, security and coexistence in the world, and the headquarters was in New York. America's efforts to establish United Nations had already begun from the time it had joined the Second World War. American President Roosevelt had made four important announcements regarding freedom while giving his message to the American Congress with the intention of human freedom, peace and security. He was believing very firmly in the four freedoms, and they are freedom of speech and thought, freedom of religion, economic freedom and right to freedom from fear. Later on, President Roosevelt and the British Prime Minister Churchill also prepared an 8-point agreement while they were traveling on a ship in the Atlantic Ocean, and so only it came to be known as Atlantic Charter or Atlantic Agreement. The agreement included underlined matters like maintaining freedom and sovereignty of every nation, peace, security, social and economic welfare, and disarmament. Then, afterwards, the foreign ministers of Britain, America, Russia, and China also met at Moscow to achieve world peace, and it came to be known as Moscow Declaration. In November 1943, three superpowers held a conference in Tehran. The representatives of 50 nations prepared the agreement for the United Nations at Washington in September 1944, and on October 24, 1945, the 51 member nations declared the establishment of United Nations. India is also a part of it. Since then, that is 21st October, is celebrated as United Nations Day all over the world. At present, there are 193 member nations of the United Nations. We will have to become familiar with the organs of the United Nations. There are six organs. Please underline. The structure adopted by the United Nations to achieve its aim includes nearly 6 organs: the General Assembly, the Security Council, the Economic and Social Council, Trusteeship Council, International Court of Justice, Secretariat. International Court of Justice is situated in Hague, Netherlands, whereas all other councils are situated in New York.